I swallowed it all. I let their words cut into me, fuel me, harden me. When they came back, I forced another smile. I played the fool they thought I was. Inside, every word they said, every fake smile they gave, was another nail in the coffin of whatever feelings I'd once had for them. Chapter 1. Shadows of Betrayal. 5 years. That's how long Grace and I had been together. We weren't wealthy, we weren't flashy, but I thought we had something stronger than all of that. Real love. We shared everything, from late-night walks in the rain when our umbrella broke to cheap dinners on the floor of our tiny apartment because the couch was falling apart. Grace would laugh about it, calling it our romantic picnic. Her laughter was my favorite sound. It made me believe that no matter how tough things got, we'd always have each other. But life has a cruel way of testing you, doesn't it? The financial strain hit us hard. I lost my job, bills piled up, and every day felt heavier than the one before. I couldn't stand seeing Grace worried, so I worked whatever jobs I could find. I worked long shifts at the warehouse, delivered food until midnight, and took up handyman jobs. My hands were blistered and my body ached, but I told myself it was worth it. I was doing it for us. Eventually, though, it wasn't enough. I had to sell our small home, the place we'd painted together, the place where we dreamed about the future. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But what hurt even more was the look on Grace's face when I told her. There was no anger or blame, just a quiet sadness that made me feel like I'd failed her. So, when my old friend Michael offered to let us stay in his grand, luxurious house, I thought it was a miracle. Micheal was always the successful one, a charismatic guy who seemed to have it all. He insisted we stay, saying it was the least he could do for an old friend. I swallowed my pride and accepted. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could get back on our feet. I was grateful, at first. But then, things started to feel off. Grace, who used to scoff at luxury, began accepting expensive gifts from Micheal. "He's just being nice," she'd say, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She started dressing differently, wearing jewelry I knew I didn't buy. Micheal, on the other hand, seemed too attentive, too charming when she was around. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the way they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking made my stomach twist. One night, Micheal came home late, reeking of a perfume I didn't recognize. Grace brushed past me with an excuse that felt rehearsed, her voice too casual. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to grab her, to shake her, and demand the truth, but I couldn't. I was too weak, too afraid of what I might hear. Instead, I smiled, pretended everything was fine, and let the doubt eat me alive. There were more signs, a lingering touch between them when they thought I wasn't looking. Grace laughing at his jokes, even the ones she would have rolled her eyes at if they came from me. One evening, I found a silk scarf in our room, an expensive brand I could never afford. When I asked Grace about it, she said it was a gift from a friend. My chest felt tight. "You're being insecure," she said, a hint of irritation in her voice. "Micheal is just helping us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. I convinced myself that I was overthinking, that I was seeing things because of stress. But every time I saw them together, my doubts came back stronger, clawing at my insides. I caught Micheal looking at Grace with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the smile of a friend. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at a man I barely recognized. Tired eyes, worn-out face, a pathetic shell of who I used to be. "What are you doing?" I whispered to myself, but no answer came. I felt trapped, torn between my love for Grace and the gnawing suspicion that everything I'd fought for was slipping away. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew, and that truth, it was like poison in my veins. Chapter 2. The light that reveals the truth. The doubt had become too heavy, crushing me every day, suffocating me in silence. So I came up with a plan. A desperate, painful plan. I told Grace that I needed to go on a business trip, something that would keep me away for several days. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was a flicker in her eyes, too quick to catch if I wasn't looking. "Take care," she said, her voice a touch too light. She kissed me on the cheek, but it felt hollow. I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand, but I didn't go far. I circled back, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I slipped quietly into the shadows of the house, hiding in a small, unused storage room with a narrow view of the living area. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. My palms were sweaty, my breath shallow. Then I heard it. A soft chime. Her phone. Grace's voice, suddenly animated. "He's gone," she said, her words stabbing me like a blade. Less than 15 minutes since I'd walked out. Less than 15 minutes for her to drop the facade. It didn't take long. Michael arrived, wearing that smug smile I'd started to hate. He stepped inside like he owned the place, and Grace greeted him with open arms. I couldn't look away. I wanted to burst out of the shadows, to scream, to grab him and demand answers, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, forced to watch as they embraced. Their laughter was like poison in my ears, and then they kissed. No hesitation, no guilt, just passion. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. This was real. This was happening. Everything I'd been afraid of, every suspicion I tried to bury was right there in front of me. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to make the walls shake with my rage, but nothing came out. Instead, silent tears streamed down my face, hot and burning. I don't know how long I stayed hidden, trembling in the darkness. I wanted to burst out, to throw everything in their faces, but I couldn't even stand. Eventually, the pain became too much. I stumbled out of the house through the back, my vision blurred. I ran, blindly, as if trying to outrun the betrayal that now lived inside me. My legs felt like lead. My mind was spinning. Images of their embrace played over and over, searing into my skull. Why? How could they? The questions kept echoing, but there were no answers. Only pain. So much pain. And then the world shattered around me. I barely heard the blaring horn, barely felt the impact as the car slammed into me. Just like that, everything went black. Chapter 3. Pretending to forget. When I woke up, the world felt heavy and blurred. The sterile smell of the hospital stung my nose, and a dull pain throbbed in my head. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like it weighed a ton. I heard voices, familiar voices, Grace's, and Michael's. The sound of them together, even here, made my stomach turn. "Is he going to be okay?" Grace's voice, soft, concerned. I almost believed it was real for a second. The doctor sighed. "He's stable, but there is something you need to know. There might be memory loss. It's hard to say how severe." Memory loss. The words hung in the air. I saw Grace and Michael exchange a glance, quick, sharp, and cold, like they were calculating something. My blood went cold. They stepped outside with the doctor, leaving me alone. I forced myself to lie still, every nerve on fire. The pieces clicked together in my head. They thought I might not remember anything. Maybe they were hoping for it. Maybe they'd see it as an opportunity to erase me from their lives. The idea made me sick. But then it hit me. This could be my chance. If they thought I'd forgotten, I could find out how deep their betrayal went. I could make them believe I was weak, clueless. It was the perfect cover. When they came back in, I was ready. I forced a confused smile and blinked slowly. "Who are you?" My voice came out weak, shaky. I hated myself for how convincing it sounded. Grace's eyes widened. For a split second, real shock. But it passed quickly, replaced by something I can only describe as relief. "It's me, Grace," she said, her hand on mine. "I'm just a friend. This is Michael. You remember him, right?" She tilted her head toward him. Michael's smile was smug, too smug. I wanted to punch it off his face, but I stayed in character. "A friend," I repeated, my voice hollow. The words tasted like ash. Grace squeezed my hand lightly, but there was no warmth in it, just an act. I looked at Michael. Are you my brother or something?" I asked, forcing a laugh. He chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Not quite, buddy," he said. "I'm with Grace now." Something in me broke. I felt it crack deep inside. But on the surface, I just nodded slowly, pretending to process it like it didn't tear me apart. "Oh, okay," I whispered. The nurse came in, and they stepped outside again. I waited until I heard the door click shut, before letting out a shaky breath. My fists clenched so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. They were thrilled. I could hear them in the hallway, whispering like snakes. "This makes things easier," Michael said, his voice low, but filled with smug satisfaction. If he doesn't remember, he won't be a problem. Grace laughed softly, like they were sharing some sick joke. Finally, we can move on. The world blurred again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was rage. Pure, blinding rage. I wanted to burst through the door, to make them feel even a fraction of the betrayal and disgust boiling inside me. But I couldn't. Not yet. So, I swallowed it all. I let their words cut into me, fuel me, harden me. When they came back, I forced another smile. I played the fool they thought I was. Inside, every word they said, every fake smile they gave, was another nail in the coffin of whatever feelings I'd once had for them. I would let them think they'd won, for now. But in the back of my mind, I was already planning. They'd regret ever underestimating me. Chapter 4. Pain in the Shadows. Living under the same roof as them felt like being trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Every day, I had to watch Grace and Micheal, acting like they were the only two people in the world. They would laugh over breakfast, whisper in the hallway, and steal glances that made my blood boil. But I forced myself to smile, to act like I saw nothing. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every smile felt like poison spreading through me. Every laugh was another knife twisting in my gut. I had to play the fool. Every day, I pretended I didn't notice the way Michael's hand would linger on Grace's back when they thought I wasn't looking, or the way Grace's eyes lit up when he walked into the room. It was torture, plain and simple. I would sit on the couch, pretending to watch TV while they laughed softly in the kitchen. My hands would shake, my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I wanted to storm in there, to scream at them, to rip their perfect little world apart. But I didn't. Instead, I channeled the pain. I let it burn inside me, turning every moment of betrayal into fuel. I couldn't let them see the truth. Not yet. At night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my head. I could hear their muffled voices down the hall, the quiet laughs, the soft footsteps. I wanted to shout, to break everything around me, but I swallowed the rage, letting it build. This wasn't the time to fall apart. This was the time to plan. So I started preparing. During the day, I acted like the clueless, memory-lost idiot they wanted me to be. But at night, I worked. I studied everything I could. How to set up hidden cameras, how to record conversations without being noticed, how to track every move they made. I became obsessed. My hands moved with purpose, even when my heart felt like it was being crushed. One day, I caught them together in the living room. Grace was leaning against Micheal, her head resting on his shoulder. He whispered something in her ear, and she laughed. A soft, happy sound that used to be mine. My chest tightened. I forced a smile and walked in like I'd seen nothing. "Hey, everything okay here?" I asked, pretending to be clueless. "Of course," Micheal said smoothly, his arm tightening around her. "You good, man?" I nodded, feeling bile rise in my throat. Never better. I walked past them, but every step felt like I was walking on broken glass. I made it to my room and closed the door quietly before the mask cracked. I punched the wall, the pain in my knuckles a welcome distraction. Tears burned my eyes, but I wiped them away angrily. I couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Over time, the cameras were in place. Tiny, hidden devices that captured every lie, every stolen kiss, every smug smile they thought I couldn't see. The recordings became my fuel. I'd watch them alone, in the dark, my hands shaking with rage and hurt. But I refused to let the pain consume me. It was a tool. My tool. I'd hear Michael's voice, dripping with confidence. "This is perfect, isn't it? He's so lost, he doesn't even know what's happening." Grace would laugh softly. "It's almost too easy." Every word cut deep, but every word also made me stronger. They thought I was broken, blind. They thought they'd won, but they were wrong. I was biding my time, sharpening my anger into something precise and deadly. Each day, I walked among them, smiling, nodding, acting like the man they wanted me to be. But inside, I was a storm ready to break. I would make them feel every ounce of pain they'd caused me. I would wait for the perfect moment, and when it came, they would never see it coming. Chapter 5. Weaving the Trap. I knew I couldn't keep pretending forever. Every fake smile, every forced laugh with Grace and Micheal was eating me alive. But the time for watching and waiting was over. It was time to strike. I just needed proof. Solid proof that would destroy them both. So, I got to work. Late one night, when they were out celebrating whatever twisted game they were playing, I set up hidden cameras around the house. Tiny, almost invisible devices nestled behind picture frames, inside vents, and even tucked into the shadows of the living room. They thought they were safe here. They thought I was clueless. They had no idea their every move was about to become my weapon. I started listening to their conversations. At first, it was the same sickening routine. Grace laughing too hard at Michael's jokes. Michael's smug voice whispering about how easy this was. But then, things took a darker turn. One night, through the static of the hidden mic, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Michael was talking about money. Big money. "The next transfer has to go through quietly," he said. "No loose ends." Grace's voice followed, hesitant but there. "And if someone finds out?" she asked, her tone wavering just a bit. "They won't," Michael replied coldly. "We've covered our tracks." My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about betrayal. Michael was involved in something far worse. Illegal transfers, dirty money. And Grace, she wasn't just along for the ride. She was tangled up in it too. I clenched my fists so hard I thought my nails would draw blood. The woman I had loved for years had fallen so far. The rage burned brighter. I needed more. I had to know exactly what I was up against. Late one night, when the house was silent and their bedroom door was shut, I crept into Michael's office. My hands were shaking as I turned on his computer, but I forced myself to focus. Every click of the mouse felt like a gunshot in the stillness. I scrolled through files, reading names, numbers, transactions. It was all there. Evidence of laundering, secret deals, enough to bury him for life. Suddenly, I heard a creak. The floorboards in the hallway. My breath caught in my throat. I turned off the screen and pressed myself against the wall, heart thundering in my chest. Footsteps. They were coming closer. I could feel the sweat on my palms. Every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I barely dared to breathe. "Please, just keep walking." The door handle rattled slightly, and I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound. If Michael found me here, it was over. Everything was over. A long moment passed. Then, mercifully, the footsteps retreated. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before slipping out of the office, every nerve on edge. My legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't afford to collapse. Not now. I made it back to my room, closed the door quietly, and let out a shaky breath. My hands were still trembling, but now it was from adrenaline, from rage. I had the evidence. Michael was going to pay. And Grace, who stood by his side, who had become just as complicit. She would pay too. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. Chapter 6. The Game Unravels. It was time to end this charade. I'd spent weeks pretending, hiding my pain, turning every shred of betrayal into a weapon. Now, the trap was set. All I needed was the right moment to spring it. So I decided to host a party, a celebration of new beginnings, I told them. Grace and Micheal bought it without question. Why wouldn't they? To them, I was still the broken fool, stumbling through life in a haze. The house was bright that night, filled with music and laughter. Friends and family milled about, raising glasses to toast the new chapter I pretended to embrace. I played my role well, shaking hands, telling jokes, even laughing like nothing was wrong, all while the weight of what was about to happen pressed heavy on my chest. As the evening wore on, I noticed Grace and Michael standing close together in the corner, whispering to each other. Michael's hand rested on her waist, a possessive gesture he made no effort to hide. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. This was it. I took a deep breath and clinked a fork against my glass. "Everyone," I called out, my voice loud and steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Can I have your attention for a moment?" The room quieted, curious eyes turning toward me. I saw Grace and Michael exchange a glance. Michael's smile was too wide, too confident. Grace looked nervous. Good. "I wanted to thank you all for being here," I began, my voice calm, even warm. "It means a lot, and since tonight is about new beginnings, I thought it was the perfect time to share something special. I reached for the remote in my pocket and pressed a button. The large screen in the living room lit up, displaying a video. The air in the room seemed to freeze. On the screen, Grace and Micheal appeared, their voices crystal clear. Every lie, every touch, every twisted word laid bare for everyone to see. Gasps filled the room. Some people turned away in shock. Others stared, their faces pale. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. No, this isn't... She stammered, her eyes wide with terror. Michael's face darkened. Turn it off, he barked, stepping toward me. But I didn't move. I held my ground, meeting his gaze without blinking. Why, Micheal? I asked, my voice low, but cutting through the noise. Afraid of the truth? He lunged, but two of our friends stepped in, holding him back. This isn't over, he spat, rage twisting his features. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, my words cold as ice. You thought you could play me, both of you. I turned to Grace, whose tears streamed down her face. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. Was any of it worth it? Grace shook her head, sobbing. Alex, please, I can explain. Save it, I snapped, the last bit of warmth dying inside me. I don't need your lies anymore. Before anyone could say more, red and blue lights flashed outside the windows. The sound of sirens filled the night, and moments later, the front door burst open. Police officers streamed in, moving with practiced efficiency. Michael's face went pale. He knew what was coming. Michael Carter, one of the officers announced, stepping forward. You're under arrest for money laundering and illegal transactions. We have enough evidence to put you away for a long time. Michael thrashed as they cuffed him, his eyes blazing with hatred. You did this, he yelled at me, his voice raw with fury. You think you've won? I stepped closer, my voice calm but deadly. I'm not done yet. As they dragged him away, I turned to Grace. She was shaking, her face a mask of disbelief and despair. Grace, another officer said, you're coming with us too. She didn't resist. She just looked at me, her eyes pleading, broken. Alex, I'm sorry, she whispered. I felt nothing, no sympathy, no regret. So am I said, my voice cold and final. As they led her away, I stood in the wreckage of what had once been my life. The party guests were silent, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. But I was free, finally free from their lies. I turned away from the flashing lights and the shocked faces, feeling the first breath of relief in a long, long time. This was the end. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. Chapter 7, The Price Paid and a New Beginning. In the days following Michael's arrest, the pieces of his perfect world fell apart like a house of cards. His name was splashed across headlines, businessman arrested for money laundering. Every dirty deal, every secret he thought was buried had come to light. I'd made sure of it. His business partners cut ties, the press circled like vultures, and his once proud reputation crumbled to ashes. For a man who thrived on power and control, it was the harshest fall. And I couldn't say I felt sorry. Grace's fate was different, but no less brutal. The charges against her weren't enough to send her to jail, but that didn't mean she walked away free. Michael was gone, taking his wealth and influence with him. The friends she once leaned on vanished, leaving her alone. No more lavish gifts, no more easy comforts. All she had left was the bitter taste of betrayal, and the knowledge that she'd gambled everything and lost. I should have felt triumphant. I'd waited so long to see them pay. But as I stood in the quiet aftermath, staring at the empty spaces they'd left behind, I mostly felt hollow. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I'd imagined. It burned bright and fierce, but now only ashes remained. Grace came to see me one last time. I almost didn't let her in, but a part of me needed to close that door for good. She looked nothing like the confident woman who once walked beside Michael. She was thinner, her eyes hollow, her face pale. Alex, she said, her voice cracking, I need to talk. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. Talk then. She took a shaky breath, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't know. Stop. I cut her off, my voice cold. You knew what you were doing. Both of you did. I was scared, she whispered, wiping a tear away. I made mistakes. Mistakes? I repeated, feeling a surge of anger rise up. You didn't make mistakes, Grace. You made choices. Every lie, every betrayal, that was a choice. She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. Please, Alex, can't we go back? Start over? I shook my head slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on me. There's no going back, I said, each word heavy. You destroyed what we had, and I'm done letting you hurt me. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. Goodbye, Grace, I said, and closed the door. It was the final chapter of a story I never wanted to be part of, and it was over. With the ghosts of my past locked away, I turned my focus to the future. It wasn't easy. There were days when the memories came back, when I'd hear a laugh that sounded like hers, or see someone who reminded me of Michael's smug grin. But every time I reminded myself that I'd survived, that I was still here, standing, while they were left with nothing but the ruins they'd built. I walked out of that old house for the last time, the place where everything had fallen apart. The sun was shining, warm on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to hope. The weight of betrayal had shaped me, but it didn't have to define me. I would build something new, something better, on my own terms. As I stepped into the light, I made a silent promise to myself. No more looking back. The past was behind me, and I would never let it hold me down again.